Hello, Reformation Project. I am so honored to be here. Thank you so much for, those lights are bright. Thank you so much for just giving me the honor. I appreciate you, Matthew, for just giving me the honor to be up here to speak to you guys a little bit about bridging the divide and talking about my life. I was really excited. So, you know, when you get to speak, you pick out an outfit and all of those different things. And after my third hot flash this morning, my outfit completely changed. So here we are. And if I stop talking, that means I'm having a hot flash. I'm not sick. I don't have a fever. I'm just sweating to death profusely because I'm just at that stage in life, okay? Some of you guys understand that. Some of you guys don't. It's all right. So I'm talking about bridging the divide. And a lot of people ask me, how are you friends and how can you communicate with people who are not like you? And sometimes it's not easy, but what I have recognized is that my entire life has been orchestrated for these moments. And what I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit about how I grew up, my life, my hero, which, by the way, my mom was supposed to be here, but she got sick, so she is now watching from her house in North Carolina. Mom, guess what? My mom got called every day by my teachers to get me to shut up. Every day. And she used to say, Monica, you're my cross. You're my cross to bear. And now I'm standing up here speaking in front of a bunch of people. So, Mom, look what happens. But I love my mom, and she is my hero, and I'll be talking about her in a few minutes. But what I'm going to be talking about is bridging the divide. How is it that we can come together in such a divided world? And that's what I'm going to be doing, talking a little bit. So here's my story. This is me. Circa 1973. That is my real hair. It is not a wig. People thought that was a wig, but no, I just had a lot of hair as a child. So yes, that is in 1970. You can tell by the outfit that's 70s, all 70s, all day long. So I grew up just like that. This is the Olin Mills picture that everybody has to take in the 80s. Look at that. I was the most uncomfortable ever in that outfit, but whatever. And that's my mom. Those are my parents and my brother. And my mom, the grammar police, you can just look at that picture and tell she was the grammar police. You can just look at her. Just beautiful. But I grew up learning that I just was different. I grew up in a small town and learning that I had to be different. I had to present myself in a way that was acceptable to society. And so this picture kind of shows that right there. But I actually love that picture. But here's my parents now, 40 years later. These are my parents. They're not together, but I still love this picture because that's us together. That's my mom. She really didn't change much. Just beautiful. So that's kind of us now, and my brother. And so this is my story. This is how I grew up. I grew up in a small town called Pasadena, Maryland. Pasadena, Maryland when I lived there, was about 7,000 people. Roughly 1% to 2% total minority population, maybe. So basically just my family. So as you can see, this is how I grew up. That's my summer color. That was at the beach, you know. Really can't see me there, but you know, I'm there. That's me. Again, I don't like that picture, so we'll skip over it. My brother chose to take the picture with my softball team. Actually, no, that's me. I just looked like a little boy at this point in life. Look at those arms. God, I miss my old body. But can you guys see a pattern? This is how I grew up. This is my high school softball team. And I'm going to be talking about that a little bit as well. This is my best friend. This is I was turning 40 that year. So this was us in Hawaii. my 40th birthday, and this is kind of us now reaching, well, actually this was a couple years before we turned 50, so I'm over 50. I'll be 51 next Friday. Yes. So that's us. But growing up in this environment, naturally, I had to learn to be resilient. Naturally. Because, we moved there in 82, I believe. And being one of the very few minorities, I heard a lot, of course. I had to be resilient through negative interactions, dispelling stereotypes, and through sports. And I'll get to sports in a minute. But I just heard things that, even as a child, I'm just like, where did you even get that from? Like questions, dumb questions, like, can you swim? I heard y'all couldn't swim. Yeah, oh yeah. It gets so much. I just left out some of the things that I heard, but why don't you talk like a normal black person? I heard that a lot too. Of course you play basketball, right? And I did play basketball, but, but softball was my passion. But I heard this. You play basketball so well because y'all have that third calf muscle. You can laugh, it's funny, because I was just like, where did you get that from? That's why y'all can jump so high. So I heard things like this growing up. I'm like, what? So I had to learn to be resilient and overcome and dispel stereotypes. So I began playing sports. I fell in love with softball, fell in love. And this is where I learned a lot of things in life that brought me to where I am now. One, I was taught teamwork and camaraderie. Like I said, I have my best friend. We've been best friends for almost 40 years now. And we've had to go through adversity and go through things, being friends and being different complexions. People looked at us weirdly, look at us differently. This is where I learned self-control. I learned how to have self-control because when you're playing competitive sports, and especially back then when I had the coach that I had, if we talked back to a coach or an umpire or talked back to an opposing player, we didn't play. You were benched, if not kicked off the team. So I had to learn self-control. I had to learn to control myself if I made an error, which was rare. And that was only because we practiced. So I had 6-hour practices at 13 years old. That's how much we practiced. We practiced ridiculously and relentlessly. But I was also taught to let your game speak for you. You don't have to tell anybody how good you are. You let your game speak for you. I was also taught some negative things in playing. The negatives are, if you're good, people are going to hate you. They're going to come after you. If you know your stuff, they're going to hate you. And they're going to come after you. I remember being 13 or 14 years old. At that time, maybe 15, we were the most well-known softball team east of the Mississippi. And we were walking into a complex, and already we saw the stairs and we saw the people pointing. And I was coming out of the bathroom, and this mother was pointing at me in my face. I'm 15. I'm a teenager. She's pointing at me, saying, "You're not that good," blah, 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 screaming at me over me not being, you're going down. And I said, oh, okay. And at that point, I couldn't say anything because we were taught not to say anything to people, right? So I had to go tell my mom and my coach, and crying in tears, and they handled it. But I learned very early on that when you're good, people are going to come at you. People don't really like you. So I had to learn negativity very early on at an early stage in life. So that's just kind of us now, and me being the, standout, awesome person that I am. These are my other parents. I had great parents. Didn't really need any other parents, but in the 80s, literally people believed in the village. So these were my other parents, and I learned that people cared for you despite your color. I remember one day, Mr. Tony is on the right. Chris is in the middle with the green shirt on. He's kind of like my brother, and Miss Kathy. And we were going somewhere, and somebody said, we wanted ice cream. And he said no. And they were like, just let him have ice cream. And he said, well, they're not your sons or daughter. They're my sons and daughter. And at that point, it just blew me away that he just considered me his child. So these things kind of taught me, and I could see how God was orchestrating everything at this point in my life. Couldn't see it then, but I can see it now, that I had other parents. This was my softball coach. He's the second most important man in my life other than my dad, and other than Jesus, of course. But he's the one that taught me the discipline that I have now, besides my parents. Sometimes we were more scared of him and what he would say than our parents. Well, no, I was never. My dad was scary, but we were scared of not playing. We were scared of how he was going to respond to us. So he taught us so many things, and he was very instrumental in my life. So moving on to how I bridge divides. I'm going to talk about my hero, my mom. My mom, this picture was taken in 2020, I believe. She ran for Congress in 2020 because she retired in 2015, and she called me one day and said, I'm flunking retirement, so I need to figure out what to do, and she decided to run for Congress. And she asked me, what do you think about me running for Congress? I said, well, I really don't want people in my business like that, but if that's what God's calling you to do, then that's what God's calling you to do, so go ahead and do it. And of course, I supported her. She has supported me in everything that I've done, so I've supported her in that, and put signs out and did all of that kind of stuff. But going back, my mother grew up in rural North Carolina. She grew up in a town called Kellamtown, which should not have been called Kellamtown because there was only one dirt road. It should have been called Kellam Street. But she grew up on a farm there. She married and had me at 19 years old, had my brother 13 months later, and decided later on to go into the workforce. She started in the government as a GS2. If you know anything about the government, it's probably one of the lowest. It's basically secretary level. And she retired as a senior exec. So that just kind of lets you know. The GS levels go up to GS 15, and then past that is a senior executive services. My mom was up there. So my mom was very, very powerful. She was very successful, and she was my hero. There's never been anybody else who's been my hero other than my mother, always. I learned how to handle negative comments from my mother. She handled adversity with dignity and grace and poise. I never saw her come out of pocket when people came at her. I never saw her lose her crap. Never saw it happen. Now, behind closed doors, she'd be like, that heifer, can you believe what that heifer just happened? But in front of people, she never did it. She did it with poise, and you'll understand why I am the way I am when I get to that in a second. I learned that how to handle that. So when we moved to Pasadena, at that time, neighbors came and greeted you and things like that. Our neighbor came over and greeted us and said, welcome to the neighborhood. We're glad you're here. We like to keep the place clean. My mother said, so do we, so don't do anything to mess it up. You know, and that's how she handled things. She moved to an area, once I became an adult and we were out of the house, she moved to an area, Alexandria, near DC, so there were all Secret Service around. And one day she was sweeping her front porch, and people kept walking up and asking her if she wanted more work. And she's like, I can't even sweep my front porch anymore. I have to get people to do it for me because and she handled it with grace. She handled it with dignity, and she changed hearts and minds. So I learned that through her. I also learned never to burn bridges. You never burn bridges. When she was a GS2, we were living in England, and her boss was a man we'll just call him Mr. Smith. I just won't say his name, Mr. Smith. And he had a daughter named Sarah. We were in second grade together. And Sarah used to come up to me and say, your mom works for my dad, so you have to do what I say. And I'm like, no, I don't. You can kick rocks and flip-flops, because I don't care what you think. Fast forward, that's the way I swear. That's my cuss word, kick rocks and flip-flops. Fast forward 10 or 11 years. We were living in Korea, and she comes home, and she says, guess who's here? And I said, who? She said, the Smiths. I said, oh, okay, cool. Sarah's here? She said, yeah. She said, guess who works for me? And I said, who? She said, Mike Smith works for me. And I was like, what a powerful lesson that I learned. It doesn't matter, you just don't burn bridges, because you never know down the road what's going to happen. So my mom has taught me all of these things. And whenever we went to a function or an event, people would just come up and be like, what's it like to have your mom as your mom? I'm like, I don't know, she's his mom. But people would say, she's my mentor. She's so amazing. She's dynamic. And so that's how I grew up. I grew up hearing all of these things about my mother, thinking that I could not live up to that. So I tried, and she was just dynamic. So even in the military, I joined the military in '96 because it's kind of funny. I went to her after college and said, you know what? I'm tired of you and Dad telling me what to do. I'm going to join the Air Force. So yeah, that worked out well for me. Now, I had a great time in the Air Force, but when I was in the Air Force, I had a friend send me an article just out of the blue. And she's like, is this your mom? And it was an article about all of her accomplishments. And she'd never even sent it to me. She just, it was just what it was. And I said, yeah, that's my mom. It's kind of weird that she wouldn't even tell me that it happened. She's like, this is your mom? And I said, yeah. She's like, how have we not known that this is your mom? I said, because everybody probably thinks I'm adopted when they hear about her. And because she is just powerful. She's just dynamic. So even at her retirement, I saw that she made a difference by changing hearts and minds. She never carried a picket sign. She never rallied. She never did any of that. She just changed. And not saying that's wrong. Not saying that you can't do that, because that's our right. But I saw her change hearts and minds through how she presented herself and how she educated herself and all of those things and engaging in the tough conversations. That's what I saw. So at her retirement, her boss just spoke so highly of her and just spoke her praises, saying things like, you're a credit to your race. And I'm just kidding. It was a joke. I'm not, he didn't say that. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Come on, lighten up, guys. That was just a joke. No, he didn't say that, but he did think something like, you don't see many people like Terry at this level. And that speaks to her willingness to succeed, or her desire to succeed, and her passion to succeed, and her drive and determination. Those are the things that I heard about my mom. That's why she's my hero, because everybody that comes into contact with her just knows that people say that I'm this person. I got it from my mother. She's very philanthropic. I noticed that she would help people regardless. She would take inner city kids on vacation. And I was like, why are you doing this? And it was to give them an upper hand. So she led the way by forging a trail. So that's my hero. That's my mom. Mom, I love you. So how did we get to where we are? How did we get so divided as a country? The easiest answer is politics, right? Would you guys agree with me on that? Politics. The problem is partisanship. We are more divided than ever. The increasing political polarization in our country is staggering. The difference between 1994 and 2004 was minimal in terms of political values. But from 2004 to 2014, the gap is huge. 92% of Republicans are to the right of the median, and 94% of Democrats are to the left of the median Republican. We're not even close enough to talk to each other. That's basically what that is saying. So how can we bridge that gap if we won't even take the time to talk to each other, right? Partisanship, the state or quality of being partisan. Oh, I'm going backwards. And that just kind of shows that gap. Look at that difference. It's staggering. We can't have conversations without bringing politics into it. So how do we expect to bridge gaps if we're continuing to talk politics at all times? So what's the solution? Of course, Jesus Christ. Both sides would say, and they say, and I'm not going to really talk politics a lot because I just don't really, I'm not. But all I will say is this. Both sides say, well, Jesus would never be a Democrat, or Jesus would never be a Republican. I don't see how you can be a Christian and vote Democrat. I don't see how you can be a Christian and vote Republican. Well, Jesus transcended human institutions. He did. Do you really think that he would just lower himself to pick a side? No. He spoke nothing of politics. He was deliberate in choosing his disciples. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So he deliberately chose political enemies to be his disciples. He called us to be the peacemakers and reconcilers. So who we're going to talk a little bit. The Zealots. He chose Simon the Zealot, and he chose Matthew the publican, or the tax collector. Two polar opposites. And we're going to get into that a little bit. If you don't really understand how significant this is, you will in a second. So the Zealots were people who believed that they were called to overthrow the foreign Roman government to purify their land. They were being oppressed by the Roman government. And the Zealots were just like, we don't submit to anybody but the Lord. So they believed it was treasonous to even connect or have any affiliation with the Roman government. Josephus said, these men believe that God is to be their only ruler and Lord. They also do not value dying, any kinds of death, so they didn't care if they were tortured, because they believed that in that so to their core. Nor do they heed the deaths of their relations and their friends. So they knew that the Romans would torture their family and friends, but they didn't care because they were that passionate about what they believed. So no man can make them, they didn't fear anybody. So this was Simon the Zealot. Simon the Zealot, and when we think of zealots, sometimes I think we just think that they're just very passionate about what they believe. No, Simon would have gladly killed Matthew prior to meeting Jesus. He just never had the chance because Matthew was always heavily guarded. But he believed that Jesus would overthrow the Roman Empire. That's what they believed the Messiah. And I think originally that's why he started following Jesus, because he believed that he was the Messiah that would overthrow Rome. But then when he found that out, that that's not what Jesus came for, he chose to stay anyway. He was fierce in his devotion to Israel in being a zealot, and then he became fierce in his devotion to Christ. He took the gospel of Jesus Christ to the British Isles, and he was martyred there. Tax collectors. Of course, Matthew was the tax collector. They were considered treasonists. They amassed personal wealth by demanding tax payments. So basically, Rome would assess taxes, and they could put on whatever on top of what Rome assessed. And that's why people were considering them so heinous, because not only did they just interact with Rome, but they also added to what Rome was already charging them. They added more. So that's how Matthew got rich. And they were tax collectors through and through. So he was a religious outcast. He was forbidden to enter any synagogue. So Simon wouldn't have entered a synagogue, and he was forbidden to enter a synagogue. He was a traitor to the nation. He was a social pariah, and his only friends were criminals and prostitutes and other tax collectors. This is who Jesus called to be his disciples. So think about that a little bit. Do you think that there were conversations when Matthew was called first, but when Simon came and he was just like, why do you have this guy here? Jesus was deliberate in choosing political opposites. So why don't we act like Jesus? He did it for a reason. Because he knew that if they decided to put their political differences aside, they could change the world. And here we are now, over 2,000 years later, and I'm talking about it. So that's what they decided to do. They put their differences to the side for the greater cause of the gospel in Jesus Christ. That's powerful, right? So here's a solution to bridging that divide. And I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of changing up what I'm doing. Do the opposite of what you're doing now. Our focus is not changing. If we are followers of Christ, our bigger vision is souls. Saving souls. So if somebody is of a different political affiliation than you, are you worried about changing their political affiliation, or are you worried about their soul? It got kind of quiet. Okay. Decide that building relationships with people is more important than their political affiliation. And I spoke at the ambassador luncheon a couple days ago, and I talked about I'm going to transition a little bit. I talked about an incident that happened at my church. So I'm at a new church. I went from an affirming church to a non-affirming church, and that was fun. So basically, we've been there for a little over a year now. But on Easter, the service was over, and Easter was going. The service was amazing. It was dynamic. The Spirit moved. It was wonderful. And this lady, I'm not going to say her name, just kind of comes up. And I felt her standing behind me. And she grabs my shirt. She's like, come with me. And And I said, excuse me? I'm supposed to wear hearing aids, but I don't because I lost my hearing in the military. And I have still a little vanity in me. I have glasses and hearing aid and a cane. I'm not going to do all that. So I said, excuse me? She said, come with me. And she walks me up to the altar. And I'm standing there, and she grabs my shoulders, and I'm just kind of looking at her, and she said, you have to give it all to God. And I said, I have. And she said, you have to give it all. And I said, I have. She said, no, everything. I said, be specific. And she said, shut up. I'm at the altar, so, yeah. And I just looked at her. And my flesh wanted to say, listen here, heifer, you can kick rocks in flip-flops. But I did not. I recognized where I was. I was at the altar. I was at God's altar. So I was not going to disgrace God's altar by returning evil for evil. And so I just kind of walked away from her. And she said, you're on notice. And I said, what even does that mean? You're on notice. Okay, I'm on notice. So are you, Miss Lady who's been married and divorced outside of biblical reasons and remarried. Okay. So after that, after service, I went to my pastor. And let me just back up a little bit because my pastor and I at this point had already had these conversations. He came to me. And actually, I had a meeting with him after he preached on Romans 1. So, of course, I had to have a meeting with him. And great guy. He's like, Monica, I know you know the Lord. You love the Lord. You love the Bible. You know the Bible better than anybody here. And you love people. And I said, yeah, you're right about all of that. And I said, here's my problem. You preach Sunday after Sunday after Sunday that if you confess with your mouth, if you believe in your heart, you confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord, you will be saved. You extend that invitation Sunday after Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. You cannot then stand in front of in a pulpit and say that somebody's going to hell based on their same-sex attraction. It contradicts itself. And the Bible does not contradict itself. So either Jesus was wrong, or Paul contradicted himself, or we're misinterpreting the scriptures. My guess is we're misinterpreting the scriptures because the Bible doesn't contradict itself. And he said, you know what, you're right. So he said, I know it's probably hard being you. I said it is, because a lot of times people bring up things that I don't even think about. And so right after that conversation, this lady, this is what happened with this lady. So she said what she said. I went to talk to the pastor. The pastor talked to her. The next Sunday, she just basically said, I didn't say what you told Pastor I said. I said, yes, you did. Be specific. She said, I didn't say that. I said, okay, whatever. And she had a stroke about a week later. And not saying that God did that, whatever. God didn't do that. And I wouldn't have wished it on her at all. I don't wish ill will to anyone. But she just, she came back. And now she acts like it never happened. And I was telling this story, and I just kind of, because I'd forgiven her already, and I told the story at the ambassador luncheon. And where's Amazing Grace? Where's Amazing Grace? What question did you ask me?
I asked you something along the lines of what you want to figure this out so you can have a connection.
Yes. Grace was just like, why didn't you guys have that conversation so you guys can have that connection? And I said, because she doesn't deserve to be in my space. I don't need her in my space. When you know who you are in Christ, I am validated by Christ alone. I don't need to be validated by somebody who has no clue what she's talking about. I don't need to be validated by that. And so I speak to her. I talk to her, and of course she acts like nothing happened, but that's why. Is because I know she is not versed in this area. I know that I know more than her. If you know what you know, and you are validated by Christ alone, why would you let somebody upset you? I just don't. I'm just like, my validation comes from Christ. I know who I am in Christ. So there's nothing that anybody can say that will make me, and I said, somebody asked me to do that. I said, I won't even lose that much sleep because somebody doesn't like me. I can't even snap fast enough to let you know how much sleep I won't lose. Because I am validated by Christ alone. So flawed individuals who are telling me that I'm wrong for who I am, I don't listen to them. But I also talked about having what I call a Fave 5. If you guys remember back in the day, the phone plans, where during the day you couldn't call anybody until after 9 o'clock, except the Fave 5, right? Well, I had a Fave 5, and I still do. That's how I live my life. I have 5 people in my life, and there's probably more than that, that sow into my life. That's who I listen to. If you are actively sowing into my life and you have shown me, if you have shown me through love and through your actions that you want to see the best for me, then I will value your opinion. And of course, my mother's one of them. I will value what you believe about me and what you think about me because I know that you're actively sowing into my life. If you are outside of those Fave 5, I'm going to love you like this lady from church, but I don't have to like you. I don't have to hang out with you. I don't value, if you don't even know my last name, I don't value what you believe about me. And that's just the way I am. A lot of that was learned from the adversity that I dealt with as a child, but also through sports. I knew people were coming at me. And I know that when you know what you know, people are going to come at you. Not only that, but I had to recognize that we are not wrestling against flesh and blood. When you look at this from a spiritual standpoint, you see what's happening. Whatever was going on with this lady from church was not resonating with the spirit that I exude. So why was I going to act the way she acts? I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to bring myself down to her level. And there was a meme going around at one time that says, My behavior is a direct reflection to how you treat me. My behavior towards you is a direct reflection to how you treat me. And I saw that going all over Facebook, and then people are like, yeah, that's right. I'm like, no, that's not right. That's not biblical at all. Like, not in the slightest. That is not biblical. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. My behavior is not based on how you treat me. My behavior is based on what the Bible says. That's what my behavior is based on. And I think that we think that because we're in an ostracized group, that it gives us the right to behave just as irrationally as they do. But it doesn't. If we call ourselves followers of Christ, we have to not be humming gators, as I call them. You got a mouth that your butt can't back up. Right? You have to walk the talk. You have to walk the talk. And so, or you have to let your game speak for you. So if you call yourself a Christian, you have to pray for your enemies. You have to love your enemies. It just is what it is. So there are over 35 Bible verses on loving your enemies. How good are we at that? So when things like this happen, it gives us the opportunity to practice what we talk about. It gives us the opportunity to grow in our faith. It gives us the opportunity to smile at people who don't know more than what we know. And if you've been at this conference just one time, you know more than anybody else in your church. Because most people do not study. If it doesn't apply to them, they're not going to study it. And so you know more than them, so why get upset? I've been in sales for 20 years, and we learn to overcome objections in sales. There's no difference here. If you learn to overcome the objections that people are coming at you, there's no reason to get upset. And honestly, all it is talking about just understanding the true interpretations of those 6 so-called clobber passages, just 6. There's more about divorce, but, that applies to people, so they don't want to talk about that. So there's just 6, and if you know those, there's no reason to be upset. You can engage in conversation with people, and it's because a lot of times we don't understand how to engage, so we just get upset and just sever ties. And if we know how to engage, that's how we change hearts and minds. So I'm going to talk about a few of these Bible verses that we get to practice when we face adversity. Romans 12, 14 through 21. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. So don't tell them to kick rocks and flip-flops. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with anyone. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. My grandmother used to say that all the time, and I'm like, what does that even? I'm going to take vengeance, but I don't anymore. It's just like God does that. Be careful to do what is right. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, but leave room for God's wrath. God will handle people much better than I can. So there's no reason for me to just get up in arms and try to take vengeance, because God will handle it, right? I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on their head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. All of us in here, get to practice that more than anybody. We get to practice that. But are we practicing that? So when people ask me how I responded to this lady, I responded this way. So that's why I'm not upset with her. I'm not angry. I just know she's ignorant to this subject. I kind of wanted to pet her like, oh, bless your heart. I live in Georgia. Bless your heart. Look at you trying to be so spiritual. Look, bless your heart. But I didn't. 1 Peter 3:9. Do not repay evil for evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. I believe God has blessed me in the way that I handle adversity, because I just believe that I'm just abundantly blessed. I'm blessed with family. I'm blessed with friends. My friend Renee is here now. She came from Georgia to come and support, so love her. Love you, Renee. So God has blessed me, and he will continue to bless me if I respond. What we have to understand is that sometimes these appointments are divine appointments. And God is just saying, all right, how are you going to respond? But we are so focused on how we're treated and how people treat us that we don't even see that God is orchestrating things for a reason. We don't see that. So we have to look at things from the spiritual and say, okay, this may be a divine appointment. I may not feel comfortable, because God did not call us to be comfortable at all. And it's not comfortable being in a non-affirming church. It's getting better, but it wasn't comfortable walking in there. But I knew that that's where God called me to be. And I had a peace about it. So I could praise and do just like everybody else, because I'm validated through Christ alone, not by anybody in that church. Right? Matthew 6:14 and 15. For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you don't forgive others, your Father will not forgive you. Ephesians 6:12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but it is against the rulers and the authorities and the powers of this dark world, and against spiritual forces in the heavenly realms. So we have to be about this. Just because we're treated badly doesn't mean that we still can't do something to build bridges. And not saying that I don't defend myself, because I do, but it is how I do it that changes hearts and minds. And like I said, I learned that from my mother. I saw her do it all the time. And so what I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit about how I do that. And I have friends who are polar opposite than I am. And people are just like, how are you friends with that person? And it's because I see the bigger picture. God orchestrated these relationships for a reason, and that reason is souls. So I'm going to show you one of my friends. Could you cue the last video? I'm going to show you a friend of mine, and as soon as you see him, you're going to be like, oh my gosh. Great guy, though. Great guy. His name is Glenn.
It was the fact that I could talk to her about anything.
Yeah.
And
Country boy.
She would take it in and come back and wouldn't tell me I was totally crazy.
Yeah.
So, and as we continue to be around one another over the years, just know we're there for one another, and that we can rely on one another. And, I'm old school, so I like words like loyalty and devotion.
Developing relationships takes time, and it takes recognizing that there are more similarities than differences. And I think a lot of times we focus on our differences rather than focusing on the similarities.
Yeah.
And so I decided that I was going to take time. I take time to nurture. And then after a while, if it doesn't work out after a while, then it doesn't work out. You just keep it moving. Mm-hmm. But, he would just call and say, hey, just want to say, hey, love you, boo. Mm-hmm. Or hey, let's go eat. And that was it.
Too, I think the biggest thing is taking an effort, making an effort to reach out to one another and keep up with one another, because the world we live in today, we want it right away. We want it. So we make friends, we're supposed to be friends forever right away.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. What works is when one or the other says something. My motto has always been, just take a chew on it. Give it a minute before you give a reaction to something that might have just been said to you. Because
especially if you want to get your back up a little bit.
Yeah.
That's when you're going to go, whoa.
Yeah. Because, then you think to yourself, one of my mottos has always been, is what we're talking about right now going to affect me a year from now? Mm. And if it's not, then why don't you just take the back seat and hush and let that be? Because when you need it, then you can call.
He's never outspoken about it.
No.
Problem with Glenn is not being able to speak his mind.
No, I'll be talking, But at the same time, whatever may have been said that may have offended or got you a little flustered, just put it aside for a minute.
So we have obviously have had differences, and we have discussed those differences. Thank you. So you see Glenn. Obviously, people are just like, he's abrasive, he's abrupt, he can be offensive. But I chose to, because I saw that this was a divine appointment, he's not saved, and I chose to overlook that. Not necessarily overlook it, but most times I addressed it. I'm just like, you're just wrong, and that's just dumb. What? Because he's abrasive, so I figured he could take it as well. You just kind of have to know your audience, right? And so I would just say, Glenn, you're so far off track, it's not even funny. But as a result of us getting to know each other and me taking the time, in that video, he's like, she's made me a better person. I've learned a lot through her. And I've learned from him as well, I learned how to cook grits and all kinds of stuff. No, I don't cook. So anyway, that's what it takes to develop relationships. It's all about taking the time to get to know other people despite our differences and forgiving them for anything that they say, following the tenets of Christ. Because if we say we're followers of Christ, then we have to be about it, not just talk about it, right? So hopefully this kind of helped you guys out a little bit in my talk, in how I am the way that I am. Hopefully that this will you guys can take this back and say, I'm going to build bridges with people who are not like me, and especially people who are from different political backgrounds, because that's how we build bridges. We have to get back to relationship and learning from each other despite our differences. So hopefully that helped you guys. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And that is my time.